Welcome, everyone, to the final conversation about Nietzsche's Also sprach Zarathustra. This is a great book. Uh, it's I kind of knew what it was going into it, but it's more lyrical than I assumed it would have been. Um, it's a really powerful book. Let me just hold on. I need to make a message here. Sorry, we have a loud toddler banging around downstairs. So anyway, let's start over. So welcome to our final conversation about Nietzsche's Also sprach Zarathustra, or Thus Spake Zarathustra. I swear I can speak German very fluently, but there's just something about this word Zarathustra. Like it didn't come from German, and I find it's hard to pronounce in German. Um, But so we finally made it to the end of me needing to pronounce the title of this piece. Um, and what a ride it was. Like, it was a very lyrical book. It had lots of vignettes and prophecy. It fulfilled a lot of the things that I thought it was going to do. And then there was a lot of surprises along the way as well. But before we get into the book, as it is, I just want to pause and say thank you to everyone who's for the condolences about our family needing to put down our cat. That was kind of unexpected, and it kind of cut into the free time that I usually use for writing. So I've been burning the candle at both ends, trying to do my reading and writing and prep for this, and then also learn how to explain death to a toddler. I think I succeeded, but we will see. Uh, so yeah, thanks again for the condolences. All's well in the family. And thank you for joining me for these lives and for reading the book along with me. I've really enjoyed Nietzsche. I didn't know, honestly, what he'd be like, because when I read, let's see, I think it was The Genealogy of Morals, and when I read The Gay Science, he was very triumphalist in those works. I would say, ironically, in Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche is usually complaining about the resentment morality that we have in this life. And it seemed that he was embodying a resentment mortality in his own critique of it. He obviously was resenting this Judeo Christian heritage, which was full of resentment. And so it was a little bit ironic. And then there was the other stuff in The Gay Science, the famous parable of the madman, where he talks about, where is God? I will tell you that God is dead and we have killed him. Not exactly a triumphalist piece, really. If you look at what the madman says, he kind of bemoans, he kind of mourns the fact that God is dead and that they have killed him and that they don't know what they're going to do next. And obviously, he picked his fights with Wagner, and then, he wrote Ecce Homo and The Antichrist, and he got more and more bombastic and argumentative, kind of punk, I would say. And so I assumed that, Also sprach Zarathustra would be one of his, like the apotheosis of that bitterness, that angst, that ruthlessness. And then it turned out not to be the case at all. I found that this was a very joyful work. It was a very life affirming work. It seemed like all Zarathustra wanted to do was go through life, and he wanted to laugh, and he wanted to dance. And he was calling out people, not to beat them in an argument, but to kind of invite them to liven up and to have fun. And so upon finishing this reading, early on, I suggested that there are certain good pairings that you might do. You might choose some Mishima and kind of his aesthetics there are very similar to Nietzsche's, his wanting to have a perfect body, to in his perfect death. We see echoes of that kind of come even in this part 3 that we read. I talked about True Detective. That True Detective, mentions a lot of Nietzsche's themes about conscience, about time. It's a very existentialist show. But honestly, after finishing this book, I think the truest heir to Nietzsche would be Nikos Kazantzakis. And Zorba the Greek, in particular, I think Zorba is the closest to Zarathustra. Because what does Zorba want to do in Zorba the Greek? Well, for those of you who haven't read the book, all Zorba wants to do is when he runs into the bookish narrator, all he wants to do is remind him how to laugh and how to dance and how to sing and how to enjoy life and to live it fully. And I think that that's exactly what Zarathustra was coming down the mountain to tell the rabble all about. And so once again, double down that if you're looking for a good book to follow Nietzsche with, Zorba is probably the best novel to do that. It picks up on all the themes, has a very charismatic character, has great writing, great, lyrical writing, lots of imagery, lots of description. This is a natural follow. So if you're looking for a book to follow Zarathustra, go with Zorba. And so speaking of lyrical, I think that that's really the word that kept coming to mind when it came to part 3. Because in part 3, we have so many visions, and we have like the riddle. This is where he's really explaining about like the moment. Like, what is a moment? This is where he circles back around to the concept of eternal recurrence. And so he's talking about like how, within a moment, all straight lines bend into a circle, and an eternal circle that must return. So once again, for those of you that have seen True Detective, when Russ Cole is talking about time as a flat circle, he's talking about this eternal recurrence, and you see it really come into the fore here in, I'd say, particularly section 2 of part 3, where I was just talking about how all the straight lines of time bend. But then you also see it in the Old and New Tablets, where he talks about how time is a mockery of moment, and about how we have this necessity that's trying to bend these moments in. There's a lot of paradox inside of Nietzsche and how he's wrestling with how to be free when things are going to return over and over again. There's the heavy determinism of eternal recurrence on the one hand, and then the other freedom to want to will everything. And I don't know if that's a tension that's ever resolved in the book. I don't think he has a clean answer for that, but I think that might also lend to part of the tension that keeps us reading book after book. The fact that he talks about, the freedom at one point, and then he'll talk about this necessity on the other, and he'll talk about isolation in one part, and then he'll talk about companionship on the other. I found that was another one of the great themes that was coming through, near the end of this book, is that Zarathustra was constantly retreating to his cave and then coming back into town. And then he would run into these people and then go back to his cave. And this back and forth between looking for companionship and needing solitude, I thought was, again, one of those great paradoxes inside of this book. And I don't know if he ever wanted me to resolve it or not. If it was just like put forward and say to show that he is still a human being, this Zarathustra. He is not the Übermensch yet. He's just like us, where there are moments when he needs to withdraw. But then he says that in solitude, the inner beast grows in us as well. And not like the good lion, but like a bad beast grows in us. And so at times like that, we need to go out of ourselves and find companions to share this journey with, this transformation with. At times we need to go out of ourselves um, and find marriage and partnerships. I find that a lot of his marriage ideas actually kind of came to a beautiful fruition in this section as well. I mentioned probably a couple times through here that I am also a big fan of Nikolai Berdyaev. And Berdyaev, he said that Zarathustra is one of the greatest books that was ever written in human history. He said it was the greatest book written entirely without grace. Um, so I guess he would put it just shy of the Gospels, but only just shy of the Gospels. He's absolutely effusive whenever he talks about Nietzsche in general and Zarathustra in particular. And one thing that Berdyaev calls out about Nietzsche is Berdyaev has this idea that we have this world as it is, and then we have the world that we want to have, the world that we want to create. And so if you have this world as it is, a lot of what we do, a lot of our actions are just about adapting ourselves to the world as it is. But then we have this thing called creativity, which is very important because creativity allows us to bring the new world into existence. And these things are kind of diametrically opposed for Berdyaev because he says that, you know, insofar as you're adapting yourself to this world, you're not transforming it. You're changing, not the world is changing. And so, one of the big things that Berdyaev calls out as a major adaptation that gets in the way of us being creative, that gets in the way of us transforming the world, creating a new world. The big thing that gets in the way of us, creating ourselves anew and afresh is actually marriage. And he says that, when Christ came in here, he was actually kind of breaking up families and inviting people to leave their families behind, to not be married, to not have children, all this kind of stuff. And because in Berdyaev's understanding of things, he wants us to go to the new world, to go to heaven, and we can't be burdened by earthly things like running a household and doing chores and having children and raising them by teaching them the language that we all use, teaching them the culture that we all use. All of these things are adaptations. And so often raising children is just repeating these adaptations. And I always thought that that was, frankly, a dumb idea because I don't know if you have children, but I think that there's nothing more creative than having a child. I mean, sure, I can draw a picture of a person, but it's an entirely different thing to make a person. And to make a person who gets to choose and create, for as much as Berdyaev and Nietzsche want to talk about how creative we are, it's like, well, yeah, then wouldn't the most amazing thing that we can do be to create more humans who can be more creative? So that was a big thing that I always thought was wrong about Berdyaev, and that he was totally missing the mark that procreativity is the best creativity because it's the only thing that makes other people. And there's nothing better than a person. I mean, there's also nothing worse, but at our best, we're the best. Um, and I was happy to see that Nietzsche didn't have this same hang up on marriage and children that Berdyaev had. In Nietzsche, he definitely, points out that like our children are these things that that first of all we make ourselves worthy of being. We escape our father's shadow by having children of our own. In his words, like by having children, we make up for having been our father's children. And I think that's a really interesting concept, that by having this new life and creating this new family, that you have a chance to recreate yourself. And I wonder, kind of like, if the Übermensch is best seen like in a family life. Like I think we have this notion that the Übermensch needs to be some kind of absolutely individualistic, um, like alpha lone wolf bro that goes around, sleeps with whoever he wants, abuses people however he wants, steals what he wants. No rules apply to them. He's super anarchistic. And so, like a grounded, committed family life, taking care of vulnerable children and raising them, doesn't seem like the thing that an Übermensch would do. However, in Nietzsche, it seems like that is one of the best ways for a person to overcome themselves. Um, the best way to like change who you are is to like become a parent and to have a child who will tell you who you are, um, and that they will tell you who they are. There's a sense of agency and freedom that comes with bringing a child into the world, and along with that, chaos. And so, in that sense, I find that being a parent is very much overcoming yourself. The Übergehen or Unter. There's the Untergehen. You're definitely undergoing something. You're definitely going under from whatever lofty place you were living in before you had children. But then you are also the Übermensch, where you are overcoming who you were as well and your hangups, because you need to be a new person for this person, not only for the child, but for your wife. And then along with that, he talked about how children do this really interesting thing. He said that they redeem the past. Like they redeem past moments where all of those failures that might have been precipitating them coming into being are now justified by them being here. And this is tying in again to Nietzsche's great theme in part 3 in particular, but it's one of his greatest themes at all, is the concept of eternal recurrence. That imagine that you have to live the life you're living like Groundhog's Day over and over and over again. And a lot of us don't know what it's for. It doesn't have a purpose. It's just arbitrarily going through motions. You go to your job and you don't know why. But in the case of the parent, again, it becomes obvious why you go to your soul suffering job. And it's for the sake of your family. It's for the sake of this freedom and this chaos and this creativity and beauty. That's why you undergo the necessity. That's why you're doing this. And so what Nietzsche says is that children redeem all of these past moments, that they say that this is what this is for. You didn't know what it was for at the time, but now I'm telling you that it's for me. It's for this. And they're grateful that you underwent all of that for these moments. Or if they're ungrateful, it doesn't matter. You're grateful typically, that you went through all of that for them. And along with that, he's got, I think some of his things on women and marriage, they got a little bit better and a little bit more wholesome as the book moved along too. Like, I think he mentioned in there that a day is wasted with your wife if you've gone a day without a dance. And a truth is made false unless it was said with a laugh. And so this dance and laughter, and this dance and this laughter that you are being a creative, couple, you're actually you're overcoming yourselves to become one entity that is more creative than individual. Again, this is in, let's see, part 12 part 2, chapter 12, section 24. If you look in there, you have, um, you're not just reproducing, you're producing something higher, where you're not just regurgitating, the same things, but with every child, you are creating something that's higher. And to go back to something that I brought up in the last lecture, we have the most of us are camels and beasts of burden, and then there's a lion switch that gets flipped in us, and then we say nine, ich will, no, I will this, I want this, this is what I want to do. And then we end with the innocence of the child. And I suggested that Nietzsche kind of like, he has this the other way around, where childhood is not necessarily the end, but it's also the beginning. Childhood is the end of the adult who becomes a parent and gives us the child. But we all started off as children. We all started off as these tiny little Übermenches. We were already the overcoming of our parents when we came into this world, and somehow we've camelized ourselves, and well, that's actually kind of funny. In Finnish, the word gamala means terrible, or horrible. So we have undertaken the horrible life of being a camel and become beasts of burden. And we need to go through the lion process to recover that childhood. Because what do children do? They laugh and they dance. They do all the things that Nietzsche is telling the Übermensch to do. And children don't need to be told to do this stuff. They do it by nature. Um, yeah, all of that is to be said that the more and more I read this book, the more and more I feel that marriage and family life is not like a side part of this, but it's actually like the secret key that I'm finding in here. Um, Nietzsche is not just for angsty people that want to be individuals who don't want to cooperate or collaborate with other people. If anything, it seems to be the opposite. Like, find someone that you can laugh with, find someone you can dance with. Neither of those are things that you can do alone. And if you find that person, you should make more persons with them so that those kids can laugh and dance by nature as well. And then it comes full circle again. And all your years of being a camel and all of your years of being a lion that said no to this and no to that, I don't want this, I do want this, all of that gets redeemed by the marriage and by the child and by having a new chance to be creative with this. So yeah, far from being, like a side conversation, I think it's the core. I think it's the key here. So I think more of us need to talk about Nietzsche and marriage, um, and becoming, like raising Übermenches. Um, so yeah, let me know what you think about that. If that's something that you picked up on your reading. Another thing that I wanted to call out in here is how he approaches like human cruelty. So if I just pick out like a note that I passed recently. So he mentions that At tragedies, bullfights, crucifixions, man has so far felt the best on earth. And when he invented hell for himself, behold, that was his heaven on earth. Um, there's a lot of stuff in here about hell. And Nietzsche is really not a big fan of hell. I think that's why he wasn't a big fan of religion, because the more religion stresses hell, the more ridiculous he finds it, the more evil he finds it. He doesn't want freedom. He doesn't want constraints. And what is prison but being constrained? And what is hell but an eternal prison? It seems like hell is the other side of the coin from eternal recurrence, where I don't think I'm going to go book by book. I think I'm just going to talk about the whole thing and how it wrapped up for me. But eternal recurrence is just a fact of life for Nietzsche. He says you only get one life. And so just imagine that you have to repeat it over and over and over again. When you have it well, it's called joy. And he says near the end, like, what does joy want? And the thing about joy is it doesn't want anything else. It enjoys what it has. It is content. And so joy and living a life of joy is living a positive life of eternal recurrence, where you look at death, he says. You look at death and you say, let's do it again. After this whole life that I've lived, once more, once more. And that person, they're laughing, they're dancing, they're creative, they're content, they're enjoying what they have. The opposite side of this, because eternal recurrence is going to happen one way or another. The psychological opposite of that joy is hell. And it's interesting how underdeveloped the concept of heaven really is inside of Christianity, which he is, arguing against. Usually it talks about how we're delivered from sufferings, but we don't necessarily know what we do after that. On the other hand, hell is very delightfully painted. People really enjoy reading Dante's Inferno, and no one wants to read Dante's Paradiso, which is a shame because it's a really beautiful book. But people are infatuated with hell because we really love putting people we don't like in it. And we really enjoy telling people that we don't like that they're going to be in our imaginary hell. And there's this cruelty that he just comes back to. And honestly, like I'm there with him. It seems kind of ridiculous that you have this punishment, but you can't come back from it. That the punishment is needlessly enforced, because it's not creating the person anew. It's not recreating them. It's not restoring them. It's not correcting an issue. And so I wonder if Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence initially came up out of the Christian understanding of hell, and that he wanted to talk against it. So I don't know. Let me know what you think about that one. Do we have any universalists in the audience tonight? I certainly am. But so let's look at it like another thing that has to do with human cruelty, that this is born out of the rabble. So there's another interesting progression that he talks about where God became man, and then man became the rabble. Man became the noisy crowd. There's another famous quote of Nietzsche somewhere that said, madness is rare in individuals, but in crowds, it's the rule. And so this ties into the earlier theme that I brought up about isolation and how you have isolation and companionship that Zarathustra is going between. And I think both of them have value for him, that you can have an isolation, but not excessively or not exclusively. And you can have companionship, but also not exclusively, because there are sometimes when we are not ubermenches to each other and we weigh each other down. We don't encourage our undergoing or overcoming. And so he had this really great section where the fool in book three of part three, he says, "There is a great city. Here you could find nothing and lose everything. Why do you want to wade through this mire? Have pity on your foot. Rather spit on the city gate and turn back. Here is hell for a hermit's thoughts. Here great thoughts are boiled alive and cooked till they are small. Here all great feelings decay. Only the smallest rattle-boned feelings may rattle here. Don't you smell the slaughterhouses and ovens of the spirit even now? Does not this town steam with the fumes of slaughtered spirit?" And that whole section, again, in part three, I find it to be the most lyrical. In that section, he just kind of goes on about how cities are the worst, how they boil down our great thoughts and our spirit into tiny thoughts. They don't distill them, they just boil them down. And I was, a lot of his stuff, when he gets to be a crotchety old man and he talks about how he doesn't like the state and he doesn't like cities, and this is where I find that Nicola Berdayev comes in and has a lot to say with Zarathustra, because yes, a lot of what we do is adaptations to this urban life, this civilization, self-preservation kind of approach, where we don't want to create new things. We want to find out how do we work within the system as painlessly and easily as possible. We above all don't want to be inconvenienced, and we don't want to inconvenience others. But creativity comes as a great inconvenience, um, particularly to those people that want to preserve society as it is because they benefit from it. And so there's a section later on where he says that the good have no choice but to become Pharisees. They have no choice but to crucify those who create their own virtues. And again, people want to say that Nietzsche is like an arch atheist. And I don't know, because there are a lot of times where it seems he is actually just trying to remind you what Jesus did when he first came here. It's just we tend not to take our prophets seriously, especially once we make them the core of our religion. And once we build a religion around a prophet, we want it to be stable and we want it to operate like a society. We don't want it to fluctuate. We don't want it to bother us or other people. Um, and so I wonder if, Christ, if Nietzsche would say that Christ is the greatest Übermensch, or maybe he would say he is a Übermensch, where he's not like, he also insists that there is my way and there is your way, but there is not the way. And so maybe he would say that, yeah, Christ has his way of being an Übermensch. I have my way of being an Übermensch, and they're not the same. And your way of being an Übermensch is not the same. This is a tension that I find plays itself out more in part four, when he kind of runs around the area and he runs into lots of different people, such as the ugliest man and the last pope, and all these people that kind of become this motley crew around him. And he needs to kind of wrestle with he wants to go back to his cave and hang out with his animals. And then there are all these people there that want to make him their prophet, and he has to deal with their flattery and then them wanting to follow him. We saw this a little bit in the first conversation that we talked about, but it really gets played out in part 4, um, where he doesn't want their flattery, and also he doesn't want to he doesn't want them to look up to him through flattery, and he doesn't want to look down to them through pity. He wants us all to be looking up. He wants us all to be overcoming. He wants us all to be Übermensching, if that's a verb. And so these bonds of flattery and admiration and pity, these are kind of reinforcing a structure that isn't where we should be going in his estimation. We are not bringing ourselves out of ourselves when we're just reinforcing those dynamics. But something I wrestle with is, while he's doing that, he also talks about, he's got very aristocratic notions in here, where it says it's a shame, when, the higher men aren't the ones that want to lead, that mostly it's the people that want to reinforce the status quo and who play the game most safely and most connivingly, but most safely. They don't disrupt the system or whatever. Those are the ones that still end up, on top and running the system and making sure that the wheels are greased and that it continues, and that society and individuals do not grow or change. And so, yeah, what do you do though when it comes to Zarathustra? Because Zarathustra is a he is like a higher man. I mean, at least he has the message. I don't know if he's personally, nearing Übermenschhood, but he's got the message of it. And so just having the message makes people want to come up to him and tell him, like, oh, you need to do more of this. Oh, you should be running. Oh, we should be following you. And I don't know if there's a little bit of like Joseph Cameron's Hero of a Thousand Faces here, where you just find, a hero who's refusing the call. He's refusing his call to take responsibility for the mission that he's been given to do. I don't know. It's not a very developed story. There is a loose plot to it of him telling his message, random people being for him or against him. And then the lion at the end, appearing and kind of roaring over Zarathustra and almost like giving a blessing that he has entered his lion-willed phase, and that he is not going to be a camel. He is on his way to a next transformation. So that's what we see in the last part there. But yeah, I don't know. Does anyone have any questions? What did you think about this book and the ending? What did you take from it? I don't really have like all that much to cover, because I feel the final 2 parts were really kind of reinterpreting and reintegrating the themes from above. I found that the theme of eternal recurrence was getting more clearly articulated in part 3. And then the ambivalence about leadership was being more developed in part 4. If I could just paint with broad strokes, I think that's what was happening there. Stylistically, I would say my takeaway is that part 3 was probably his most lyrical and his most poetic. There were lots of really beautiful puns and alliterations and images that were done there. um, in both Kaufman's translation and in the German itself I was reading. And then the stylistic thing that I noticed from part 4 was it was very comic. It was very awkward, that he would call out, you know, particular crabs and Angora rabbits and green snakes. And there are all these things over there that are just very, very precise, very clumsy. How he describes the most awkward man. They're almost archetypal in a sense. I mean, Carl Jung has a book that covers Nietzsche's whole Zarathustra in, I think there's 2 volumes of lectures that he gave his students, and I would I would love to read that whole book and look at all of these images about a snake being in a shepherd's mouth and fishing a sea inside of a person and catching crabs, why Angora rabbits over a different kind of rabbit, um, lions and camels. Like there's so many archetypes and very oddly precise things that are images that are happening here. And I wonder how he would interpret those, from a dream perspective. How would he interpret those from like a dream perspective? What does it all mean about Nietzsche's subconscious that's happening here? Um, and then along with that, the comedy and the back and forth in part 4, well, it really struck me like Don Quixote. And if you've read that book, you know that there's all these episodes where he runs into really unique characters in these odd situations, and they need to try and like kind of come to a resolution. And he follows those things, and sometimes they're really weird. Like when he ran into the guy with the leech, that this guy is like putting his arm in the swamp to have the leech suck all the blood out, and that he's trying to get in the mind of the leech and all of this. Well, when Zarathustra first runs into this guy, he actually steps on him, and and he says, "Oh, my apologies for having stepped on you, but more than my apologies, I'm going to give you a parable." And I was like, what is the audacity of this guy? Like, who would step on someone and then say, rather than giving you an apology, I think I should lecture you? So there was a lot of like silliness like that I found in book 4 or part 4. And it seems very fitting that maybe he is like a quixotic character. Maybe he is like Quixote, because there's something about Don Quixote that matches up with Nietzsche's Zarathustra, where both of them are seemingly out of their mind to everyone else. Um, Don Quixote wants to revive the chivalric order when the rest of the world is trying to become modern. And then meanwhile, everyone wants to preserve the modern, or this particular archetypal world, and Zarathustra comes to announce the overman and transcending this world. So both of them are kind of playing an interesting role, and or like an analogous role. And so it's interesting how maybe humor, I wonder if that's an essential part of someone confronting this world, that they're going to seem odd to one another, that they're going to talk past each other, that they're going to be absurd and funny. So, yeah, I'd like to think a little bit more about Don Quixote and how he relates to Nietzsche and how much Nietzsche might have read Cervantes. Um, but yeah, I think I'm going to end it there for right now. Um, because yeah, I was very moved by this book, not like in an emotional way. Um, I was very surprised by this book. I found Nietzsche to be very surprising, given the caricature that we have inherited of him. Um, and it's a caricature that he himself painted. He turned himself into a very bitter, angsty person who was not successful in romance, who was not successful in maintaining his mental health, who was not successful in maintaining his friendships. Um, he didn't have a good go of it, I would say, but there seems to be this archetypal Zarathustra character to him who isn't trying to win the world's game. Um, he's trying, and Nietzsche puts it in this stark language, where Nietzsche says that we don't want to, well, only those who kill most thoroughly can laugh. And we kill the world through our laughter. And I think this is a really beautiful book because his life is not gonna get better, from here. He was sick, he was weak, he was not a strong person, he was not an Ubermensch by maybe his own standards, but he had this image of a Zarathustra that was coming through to preach laughter, to preach dancing, to preach companionship, to preach creativity. Again, it sounds like a Zorba to me. Um, Nietzsche needed this Zarathustra, probably more so as life went on. I wonder, how much he listened to him. How much did he take his own advice? Because it seems, yeah, that he collapsed into bitterness, that he collapsed into mental illness, and that he became a meme that we all just pass around when we talk about angsty, bitter, incel, sophomore philosophy bros. Um, but I don't really see that in this book. I find that Zarathustra is a rather charitable person. He is a friendly person. He's an optimist. He's creative. He's fun. I want to dance and I want to laugh with him. Um, so I was expecting this to be a much more ruthless book, that it was going to be much more dog eat dog, that it was going to be a very zero sum game that he was trying to play, that it was going to be my will over yours and whoever has the strongest will wins. Um, but that proved out to not be the case at all. He's someone that invites people to play. Um, he doesn't try and beat people. And yeah, it's not who I thought Zarathustra would be. It wasn't who I thought Nietzsche was going to be. And I think that's the great part of reading, is being pleasantly surprised like that. Um, so I hope that you were pleasantly surprised by that as well. Um, let me know, some of the things that you picked up on this reading. Let me know if uh, if he matched what you thought he was going to be, how you were surprised by Zarathustra, and let me know what you're taking away from this book. There's so many little bits here and there that I would take. A lot of good one-liners to carry with you as well. Um, so it's definitely a book that I'm going to be revisiting, and I'm glad to have done my first full reading of it with you guys. So thanks for joining me for Nietzsche's Zarathustra. And then final plug, for our next book, we're going to do George Eliot's Middlemarch over the next 4 months or so. And we're going to pick up at the last Wednesday of August, I believe, or I'm sorry, last Wednesday in July. And then we're just going to do those last Wednesdays again. So, yeah, grab your copy. George Eliot has been having quite a moment on Substack for, I would say, the past year, maybe year and a half or so. I haven't read her yet, but I always say she seems like if Jane Austen wrote a bunch of philosophy. And so I'm looking forward to getting into this one and seeing her understanding of sympathy, how lives are connected, how our decisions affect one another, how relationships don't work and how they do work. So I'm excited to read that one with you all next. And yeah, thanks for reading with me. Thanks for coming out tonight. All right, take it easy.